Hello, everyone. I'm Dharmender here, founder and CEO of MergerWare. Today, we bring another interesting topic, unleashing M&A value through ESG. ESG have been in agenda for most of the company, and now we have our speaker Tanay Shah. Tanay is part of M&A team in Delight, looking at and leading ESG practice. We are going to have very interesting discussion today, and idea is to look at some of the best practices, why ESG matters in M&A and how companies are doing, and getting some of the expertise from Tanay and his experience. And I think it will be very good for our audience. So Tanay, welcome you. Good morning and welcome you on board today. I would like you to give, if you can give some, background about your profile, what you, do within Delight, that will be good for our audience.
Thanks, Dharmendra, and thanks for the opportunity here. I am a U.S. partner in Deloitte based out of our Chicago office. And I have a couple of different hats. One, and most remain here, is I lead in our consulting U.S. M&A practice, I lead our ESG efforts. And the second is I also happen to lead our national practice around M&A strategy and diligence. How I got into this is, to be honest, the story of how I grew up. I grew up in Seattle, where the nature was a big part of my life, but also I grew up in the '80s, where there were lots of arguments on things like spotted owls and fishing rights, and this really gets to that whole ESG frame of that fight of nature, the fight of what's happening in the environment around us and people.
Okay, so I think good that you gave some background about your profile and how we can do this ESG. So my question to you is, and while I was just thinking what all questions we should have, then some important points while I was going through what companies are doing and doing my study, I looked at a couple of points which are very interesting. So the first question to you is, why does ESG matter in M&A? Would you like to discuss why ESG has become more critical than ever now, and what are the important agenda for companies in the recent years?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and I'll give an example. Last week I was in a workshop with a client, an investor, and we had our chemicals experts there. They recently bought a chemicals business, and we were thinking through, well, what's the just old school, how do you think about value creation? And one of the things we discovered was, so one of the waste products was actually an input into the EV battery business. And that on its own, just connecting yourself to EV batteries is a huge growth market, and therefore it could impact you, right? So that's one example of why ESG matters. But another one is, I think we're starting to see more and more regulations. Europe, for example, very recently, they've had a couple of books, a couple laws in the books, but then on top of that, now they're adding in I just recently read last week, they announced a potential carbon import tax. Mm-hmm. And so these are now going to become, these issues are going to become very real to the deal, the construct of the deal. They're going to become real to the financial model behind the deal and the valuation. So I think those are two germane reasons. And I'll just leave a third, which is often companies have grand visions around ESG or CSR, whatever they call it, and it never really permeates into their deal cycle. And this is an opportunity to actually connect the dots between the company, its vision, CSR, and back into how they think about their transactions.
Yeah. So I think good that you gave this example. So how basically, you integrate ESG consideration into deal, maybe DD and deal structuring, and how will communicate ESG related benefits to your stakeholder?
Yeah. So let's break that apart. And if we're in diligence, the first thing we do is we start with creating a materiality view, and we look at SASB or one of the PRI, all the different frameworks and standards that are out there that the company also believes and our client also believes, and will create a material view of what matters, doesn't matter. And I think this is where just my observation is the ESG professionals that are out there and the deal professionals out there start separating a little bit, because that list doesn't look very material typically to someone who's a deal a person, right? And so what we start doing is looking for things that will actually matter to the deal, things that will impact price, or create risks. And there's this aspect of things like physical risk, transition risk, and it's a private equity exit risk, right? What's going to happen over 5 years that we start considering, and we draw this out. So, for example, we were recently doing a deal with a solar business, and what we found was, just as the world heats, degradation of all those solar panels and particularly in the desert Southwest was going to increase, and that was going to increase the capital cycle. Now, that looks like normal diligence, but it all started through the ESG component of it. Yeah, so that's how we think about ESG and like what matters, and connecting it to what stakeholders should be thinking about.
Yeah. And so how can company measure and report this their ESG performance, and what metrics they should be tracking? So generally, what are the critical metrics they have to track? Yeah.
So that answer, it's going to sound like a consultant answer, but it really does depend on what's material, and whether it's greenhouse gases, or you get an inch or two deeper and you start thinking about like what are the drivers of those greenhouse gases. Similarly, on the social, for a long time, people have been tracking the number of women on boards and the number of women within the employee set, and increasing through managerial ranks. So it's a complex answer. There's a lot more behind it, but you have to start by what matters for the deal or what matters for that company. One thing I like to do is where our clients have a vision around ESG already, starting with that and then converting that into what metrics will matter for them. Just the last thing I'll say is you can't do this in a vacuum. So if they have a dashboard, using that dashboard, if they don't have one, recommending a dashboard that actually collects the metrics that are germane to that deal or in that business.
Yeah. So basically, so these are basically all the company have similar kind of dashboard or matrices which they will report.
They'll all be different, and
Okay.
they have to be. Each company has to be specific to their industry, their where they're located, and then their business.
Got it. Yeah. So if I move on, what I understood from you. Now, my next question comes to my mind is, how can company ensure that their ESG commitment are aligned with their overall business strategy and long-term growth objective? So what are some of the best practices, to making sure that, our ESG commitment are aligned with what our overall business strategy we have, looking at long-term growth objectives?
Yeah. And that right there is the rub, right? Because ESG has it's a framework, and you can't be everything to everyone, and you really have to choose and connect the dots with your business and what's possible. There are businesses out there, heavy industrials businesses, where the impact today may be limited, but there's things, maybe new technology is being formed in a few years that might actually help. I think just getting back to the spirit of what you're asking, like how do you connect the two? I think you have to, it starts with your stakeholders, and it starts with being able to triangulate what matters to each of the stakeholders, and then what you can actually do and continue your growth. And this is, what excites me about ESG is that there is a tremendous amount of growth that's also possible through this. I mean, what we're almost saying is, hey, there's some set of stakeholders out there that care about something other than the way you've been running your business or the products you've been developing. And you know, while today maybe consumers aren't really willing, even if they say they are willing to pay extra, B2Bs are. And eventually I think we might find actually consumers are as well. And so it's a whole new set of products that you can create off of that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's very good. You know, I think this point, what you said, this, I think if you look at all the USG commitment, I think alignment with overall strategy, long-term objective, you know, this, I think most of the company, they wanted to make sure that it is done and they monitor
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And also
Mhm.
one of the biggest stakeholders is shareholders at the end of the day, right? And your
Exactly.
ability to meet those.
Mhm.
So I think you have to carefully connect all of it together, but also, you know, ESG can feel, I think, for many companies as a tax,
Right.
but there's another set of opportunity. That's what I was trying to get to, that there may also be an opportunity for you to either reach a new underserved market or create new products that fit into that thematically.
Right. Right. So, now we spoke about how companies' commitments are done. Now, my next question is more towards, how can company ensure that, our ESG consideration are incorporated into post-merger integration plan, and what are some of the, maybe you can give some of the pointers, which helps company to really make sure that ESG consideration are taken into account in PMI.
Yeah, and this is an up and coming area, right? Like I think you've got, I'll sort of throw out several archetypes of clients that I've run into. So one archetype is both companies actually have an ESG program, and whether it's reporting or they're actually looking at deeper into their business and changing things. And this follows sort of the same path that you do in a lot of other functional integrations, where you're going to look at, where do I want to be, think back to like day one, or where can I be, and along the way, how am I going to build this program? And it's sort of figuring out, you could have a situation where the companies are looking at different metrics. You could have a situation where the companies are diametrically opposite ends of like what they're trying to do, and getting them on the same page, and then executing on it. And to our earlier conversation, it's got to link back to the strategy, and it's got to link back to your customer set and what you're trying to do in the market, as much as it does to whatever your shareholders and other stakeholders want. There's another set out there of clients where one may have it and another may not, a program, right? And there it's typically just broadening your program.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is just nothing exists, right? And it's an opportunity to create something clean sheet. I think just one thing, that the immediate thing I would do, whether it's in diligence or assigned to close, is I would start thinking about, I now have a broader footprint. What how does this deal impact tomorrow's footprint, right? Once the deal closes. Mm-hmm. And what do I need to do if I do believe in greenhouse gas reduction, and that's one of, let's say we've told the world that 15% reduction across the board, how am I going to get there, right? Yeah. If I believe in like the number of women on the board or other levels, and that's one of my key metrics, fine, how am I going to get there, and start planning that. And that gets to an integrated view of the integration program. The last piece I'd say is think through the risks as well, right? Whether it's transition risk, exit risk, all of this, but also think through areas like the tax I mentioned earlier. What's the impact, and what's going to impact the P&L? And that gets to real dollars and cents impacts.
Yeah. So, my next question, and I think this is the last one in my agenda today, is if you can give some of the practical tips and best practices for company looking to leverage more on ESG for success of the deal. So I know many of the points you have already, are covered, but if you can give some of the tips and the best practices, what do you think that is important for company to leverage that will be good for our audience?
Yeah. So don't think about ESG in a silo is my first one. And your tax team, for example, should be thinking about ESG because tax has there's so many credits, incentives, or taxes that play a role here, right? That's number one. Similarly, ESG is something that, particularly if you're a B2C client, there's great amount of excitement out there and some level of your consumers. Think about that. In a B2B construct, think about if you can actually grow your business in a particular direction that takes advantage of the theme thematically. But just don't think about it in a vacuum. And to that point, in the survey results that we've gotten, what we've seen is even within a company, the M&A team and the ESG team are separated and they are not that well connected and drive that connection even before the deal. The second is, this is one of the few times I think in our careers that we're going to be able to be as creative as possible. And what I mean by that is this doesn't exist. This whole area is still forming. The laws around this are forming. People are testing things out, creating new, whether it's regulations or new products or new ways of thinking about solving the problems around ESG. So I think be creative and look for opportunity. I think those are my two biggest ones. Now, having said that, you still need to turn this into a regular practice and writing, having a playbook around it, having some structure. And this last one, I think is change management is so important around this, like explaining why what X means, why you're focused on, let's say, a particular metric and what it means to the company and how it actually pertains to value. I think that story is important. Not everyone is going to be on board with that agenda. But being able to explain why it's important, it gets people on the same page.
Right. Yeah, I think these are a good takeaway for our audience. I think I know most of ESG practitioners, I think they know this, but then how to bring them in practice, how to communicate, how to work more, in collaborative way, so that we can track these practices and make sure that they are effective for our success. So thanks for your time.
Sorry, can I add? I'm going to add one more thing here. So the SEC is going to come out with rules here any 1 minute here, and when they do, I think that's going to be a change, just like in Europe for us. And ESG won't be a topic that you can ignore anymore as a result, because you're going to have to report on it. And we don't know how deep, we don't know kind of like necessarily what form those rules and how long it'll take, but I think that's going to give the market a lot of direction, at least in the US here, of what's needed, similar to what Europe's done.
Right. No, I think and now I see the most of markets now, ESG have been always in the agenda of the company. And I think everybody is trying to see that they can implement, from the very beginning of the deal till post-merger integration. So thanks for all your inputs, Tanay, and thanks for your time. I think thanks to our audience who have been listening this. The idea of bringing Tanay is to, get some of the best practices and let you practice them and ask more questions whenever you have. So we'll come back again with another round of session on ESG, and we look at, how we can really add value to your ESG goals. Thank you, Tanay, for your time, and we'll talk to you soon again.